Thank you very much, David. So I'm Owen Lewis. I'm Deputy Director of Monitoring, Innovation and Insights, part of the Chief Scientist Group in the Environment Agency. And I'm going to hand over to Katrina, who didn't know she was doing this until about 3 hours ago.
So you'll notice I'm not Adnan, and I'm Katrina Penny. I work in the water environment team on water policy, thinking particularly about the framework for how we manage the water system. And so we've got a couple of questions to run through to structure the session, and then we'll take some questions from the room. But the first question to start with, that I'll direct over to Lewis, is what across our water environment do we already monitor, and how does the NCEA complement and enhance this? Or actually, there were some opening remarks you were going to add in general.
It's fine. I'm going to start with the context. Yeah. I think what's been really good is that people this morning have gone right into how tricky it is to monitor the environment, both from a sort of science perspective and also from an operational perspective. I'm going to follow that theme on. I was doing a bit of work for the spending review yesterday, and I was just trying to work out a sales pitch. Did a bit of Googling, and it turns out that in England, there are 38,000 kilometres worth of rivers and streams. So that's 23,500 miles. I then compared that, that's 50,000 kilometres of rivers and streams. I then compared that to total length of A roads and motorways in England. And that's much, much less. That's only down at just over 30,000 kilometres. So it shows you quite how much we've actually got to monitor. And that's just the rivers. We've got lakes, really important. Groundwater, hugely important for our drinking water supply. We've got coasts, and we've got estuaries as well. So to collect data on that is a huge endeavour. We've been doing it for about 30 years, possibly more in some cases. I know that we've gone back to the 1800s with some specific locations around England. Traditionally, particularly over the last 20, 30 years, the Environment Agency and its predecessors have spent a lot of time going out in vans with buckets, sampling for chemicals, doing biological surveys. We divide up our rivers, for example, up into, across England, 4,000 sort of parcels, each about 14 kilometres long. And we provide status assessments for each of those 14, and that goes straight out to the public. It's all fully transparent. But it's kind of come from an era that we're moving very rapidly away from. It's come from an era where the problems in the environment that we've wanted to manage most have been pretty much constant. The constant flow of the pollutant out of a pipe, for example. The constant leaching from an abandoned mine into a river or an estuary. We're now moving into a world where actually things are much more intermittent and much more evocative to the public. You would have seen, and you don't need me to elaborate on the public interest around bathing waters and sewage right now. So we need an evidence base that kind of urgently looks at the intermittent, the more dynamic sense. We also need an evidence base that takes the evidence beyond just what's going on in terms of water chemistry and biology, but actually reconnects that with what humans want out of it. They want a place that they could admire. They want to go swimming. They want to know there's a place for biodiversity in the rounds. So that natural capital element is really important, and that's where the NCEA monitoring program comes in. So one of the things we're doing with the NCEA, and it's not all about data, it's all about monitoring and the survey and going out. It's about actually using the data once it's in. I was really pleased. There was lots of chat about that, sort of the data-driven aspects of NCEA this morning. One of the things we'll be doing for the first time is designing a statistically robust design for our rivers and streams. So you might have all heard of the headline that only 16% of our English rivers currently meet ecological status. That, I'll share with you, has some slight flaws to it, because where we've traditionally gone to take records that align with that statistic have been deliberately targeted at those places that we're most worried about, so the ones that are most prone to pollution. With the NCA, we're going to take a completely unbiased approach. So we're deliberately doing randomized sampling in cleaner catchments, in cleaner parts of the estuary, in cleaner lakes, as well as the dirty parts as well. So that's actually going to give us, for the first time, a truly mathematically robust assessment of the environment. Now, I've been working on this myself with my technical colleagues, and I can see that coming down the conveyor belt, and that will be coming to the public in the next couple of years, and that's going to be really exciting because it's going to show the environment, the water environment, in quite a different way. Another thing we're going to be doing is the source-to-sea approach. It's vital that we understand the water environment, the collective environment as a system. So what we do at the top of a catchment can directly influence the life cycle of salmon as they migrate through to lakes and coasts and vice versa, etc. So it's all got to be connected, and that's really going to help policymakers, because policymakers can, for the first time through the NCA datasets, see how an intervention in one part of the environmental system can have desired or undesired consequences in a different part of the system and into a different geography as well. So that's it in a nutshell.
Nice.
Okay. So we're going to turn the tables, and I'm going to ask you a question. So, Katrina, how will the NCA support government and other decision makers delivering against national goals and targets?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this follows on from what you're saying on the first question, that the kind of evidence that we have currently about the state of the water environment is really based on that sort of targeted monitoring towards specific water bodies. And that, from a policy side, really influences what we're able to develop in policy and where we can target things and how certain we can be about the outcomes we'll be able to deliver as a result of interventions and investments. And so having the NCEA doing this much more sort of robust, scientifically based, evidence-based way of assessing the whole water environment together and getting that assessment of the state of the environment as a whole at a national scale will be incredibly valuable. And that will help us when we're thinking about setting targets and setting trajectories for where we want to get to, and also thinking about the specific interventions that we do underneath that and what we want to encourage and where in order to deliver the targets that government's setting and how we can assess how we are delivering against those targets. And I think one of the things you were saying earlier about being able to think about other benefits and other things that the NCEA delivers, so not just thinking about the water environment through this one lens that we have from the Water Framework Directive monitoring at the moment, and thinking about the other things that we get out of the water system. What do we get in terms of our physical, mental health? What do we get from recreation? What sort of benefit does a good, healthy water environment give to local economies and local communities? And thinking about it in a more holistic way will really help us to demonstrate the benefits you can get from investing in the water environment, and help us with those other conversations we have with other departments about, you know, when you're thinking about designing your policies and thinking about interventions on roads or through house building, we can demonstrate the positive impact that the water environment will get, or the water environment can deliver, if you consider water when you're developing your policy as well. And that will be really, really important when we think about those trade-offs on water. And I think one of the other things I was just going to flag as well was when we talk to water companies or some of the other groups that deliver big investment on the water environment, one of the barriers they really find sometimes with trying to justify, in particular, nature-based solutions is evidencing the benefits and being able to clearly demonstrate that by using a wetland as a way of treating a water body or removing phosphorus from wastewater, even though maybe the evidence isn't as robust or it feels a bit more risky, it's very hard to demonstrate those additional benefits that you get from habitat creation or from being able to have people engage with that habitat compared to a more grey solution or an end-of-pipe solution where the benefits are a bit more cold or hard. You can see them in a more rational way at the moment, but being able to attribute that to a much broader set of outcomes will be incredibly valuable for helping to deliver more holistic policy that really targets multiple things at the same time and means we can do much more joined up thinking across areas. But I guess, is there anything else on your side?
Just a couple of things. So at lunch, I met a colleague for the first time from Department of Health and Communities, Emma Lamb. So it's really good to meet people from that particular part of government, because I think, like you're saying, I think we need to do our level best to join up health with environmental issues. So transaction of data, for example, is going to be really key. I think Emma was sharing her initial thoughts that actually we hold probably a lot of the scientific capability. I think they hold a lot of motivation on their side, but we actually hold a lot of the capability. We hold a lot of the data that they really need in the Department of Health. So I think NCA can really help with cross-government join-up. That's going to be massive. But finally, just to acknowledge as well that I've been talking about monitoring and you've been talking about monitoring and data acquisition, but a lot of the really powerful data isn't ours in the first place. The really juicy data on economics, on socioeconomic insights, that's actually going to be rightly from other organizations. So when we're thinking about the data solutions here, we need to think about acquiring data alongside actually pushing out open data. And, it's the power, the socioeconomic data is really the magic of where natural capital happens.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I think next we've got some Q&A, so I'll hand back over.
Yep. Right, so we don't have Slido for this session, but if anyone's got any questions, if you could put your hand up, then we've got some roving mics and we will take them one by one. So I can see a gentleman over there in the corner.
Thanks very much. Luke Ridley, work in water quality in DEFRA. So I guess a question on NCA's looking at things that people want and how it maps against what the public expect from the water environment. At the moment, we've had quite a lot of conversation around, very upsetting it, but like being there. We've had a lot of conversation about the kind of physiochemical aspects of water. Just wondering what you thought about kind of trying to map it against what people want, perhaps from a public health risk point of view, amenity, access, the other things that we really want from the freshwater environment, and how we get data on that and build it into what the NCA is bringing. Thanks.
Okay, shall I go first?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that reinforces, Luke, the last point, in that that's a huge drive for us in terms of trying to couple up conventional water chemistry, water biology information with actually what people need. For me, it comes down to really good acquisition and use of spatial data. So it's not right to say that the public want the same thing from every single aspect and corner of the water environment. They're actually very specific. It's what we've learned, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, of where they want to go swimming and what they expect from different places. There's some really obvious things like Windermere, which is kind of the crown jewel of our kind of water system in some ways. We know that's a huge receptor, but we also need to go and find conversations with the public. Where else do they most value canoeing, swimming, fishing, etc.? We've got some of that data, don't have all of it. And how do we open up? It's a difficult question. I'm not going to be able to answer your question specifically, and I might even throw a kind of a question back out to the audience, really, which is how do we actually acquire that data on where do people go swimming? It's well beyond our conventional data acquisition models, and it just plays to that point I made. We need to think about actually how we get data in from other places, including the non-obvious suppliers. Katrina?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, there we go. So I think from a policy side as well, I guess. So the different things that we monitor really obviously influence the way that we develop policy and the things that we think about, particularly thinking about the water environment. When I first joined water 5 years or so ago, a lot of the thinking was understandably really based on like the ecological status of the water environment and the actions we needed to do and deliver to try and improve water environments as a habitat for biodiversity and for species and things like that. But obviously, over the last few years, lots of people will have seen there's much more interest now in terms of using waters and rivers and lakes as bathing waters and people wanting them to be safe for swimming and for other kind of recreational activities. And the way that we assess those kind of things, without getting too into it, I guess, we've got different sets of standards for a bathing water versus a good ecologically healthy river. And if we've been focusing on one rather than the other, that really means that we've been directing a lot of resources towards something that in a few years' time people have been saying, well, actually, the thing that I really want out of my river is to be able to swim in it. And you've not been focusing on that over the last 10, 15, 20 years, however long. And that being able to have a way where we sort of capture things all together in the round and think about what is the purpose of a river to a community and to the habitat and to all the people who need it and the economy and everyone that needs services from that river or lake is really important and really beneficial and will hopefully mean that we're more set up to be able to deliver things that people really want out of their ecosystem as well.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yep, there's one in the back of the room there.
Hi, Roger Proudfoot, Estuary and coast manager in the Environment Agency. It was great to hear you mention Source to Sea, Owen. Thumbs up from me, obviously, for obvious reasons. Let's assume that everything is hunky-dory and SR is great and we all continue with our great work on the 2 programmes going forward. Have you got any suggestions as to how we might be able to integrate more effectively across the 2? Source to Sea thinking is obviously one way of starting to raise that, but I think earlier in the day there was a bit of discussion about breaking down silos and that kind of thing. But is there any kind of practical things that you think we could build into both programmes to get that better join up?
So I think, Roger, one of the things that we're doing with the NCA, not just on Source to Sea, but a number of other NCA initiatives, is quite groundbreaking. And we're playing a lot with the concepts, aren't we? But I think we need to just mitigate the risk of just doing this all on a desk and actually start getting stuck in with some pilots and actually see what comes out of them, the unexpected as well as the expected. So I think one of my answers to that question might be, well, let's go out there, if we can get some funding, and try a little bit of Source to Sea and joining up the data sets and the twin track approaches in a couple of locations, a couple of geographies around England, and see what happens. And I think the quicker we can turn these concepts from the desk actually into some applied pilots, the better it will be, the quicker we'll learn, and the better solutions we'll create. Katrina?
I think, I don't think I have much to add, I guess, on that side. But one of the things that we do look at in our team as well is particularly thinking about that sort of integrated, joined-up decision-making. It's one of the things that comes up so much on water is that so many decisions are made in silos, and that's across environmental things, and it's also thinking about policy areas that intersect with water but are kept separately, or decisions are made separately. When you think about planning decisions or road infrastructure, that's not necessarily made in the round, where you also think about the environmental impacts as well. So looking at, one of the things we're looking at is like this sort of framework that we use for managing water, and how we can encourage a framework that leads to much more integrated decision making across the piece. And Source to Sea would obviously have to be part of that, because it's such an essential part of how you manage water. If you want to deliver the outcomes we need to deliver, we need to think about all the impacts in the round and how pollution travels across different waterways. But yeah, not much to add that we had.
Thank you. So I was half hoping there wasn't going to be a question from the audience, because I had a question for you as well. But I won't give it to you now. I'll let you have that in the break. But the question, which I think I'd like to extend also to everyone here, is, you talked quite a lot about how do we get better engagement across government, because these need to be cross-government decisions, and this systematic assessment of the environment is useful across the piece, and we need to work across the piece. And there is a piece of paper in your delegate packs which is asking for feedback around the programme. So if you've got some advice or some suggestions about how we do that better, please use that piece of paper to make those. But I think I'd just like to say thank you very much for a really riveting conversation. And particular thanks to Katrina, who really didn't know she was doing this until about 10 o'clock this morning. Adnan, unfortunately, had a sort of personal emergency that he had to see to, and Katrina very kindly agreed to step in. So thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.